Hi YouTube, this is Joe Calton with Calton Cutlery, and visit me on the web, caltoncutlery.com. Today's a glorious day to be inside heat treating pocket knife parts. It's about 25 degrees outside right now, so fairly warm, but for this time of the year. But the wind's howling at about 30, maybe 35 miles an hour. I mean, it's gusting out there, and the snow is coming in sideways instead of from the top. So a nice day to be sitting in a nice cozy shop with a couple of Labradors, wood stoves going, got the forge all warmed up over there, and we are going to be heat treating some blades and springs to be making some slip joint pocket knives. We're going to be doing this out of 1095 high carbon steel. 1095 high carbon steel has got a reputation for being tricky to heat treat. I don't really think that's the case. 1095 heat treats just like anything else that I've ever worked with. There are a couple of considerations when you go to heat treat 1095. When you're heat treating 1095, your temperature control is pretty critical. But then it's pretty critical on any other steel anyway, so we can throw that out. 1095 does like to be cooled very quickly, okay? If you talk to the metallurgist guys or the guys on the internet that try to make heat treating sound like it's rocket science or something like that, there's like a nose curve or something where you heat it up above this temperature and then it's got to get cooled down faster than this nose curve to be able to harden. I'm of the school of thought you heat the stuff up, you get it cold, and then you test it, and then you find out what works and what doesn't work, and then away you go, right? So 1095 does like to be cooled very quickly, all right? One of the problems with that is with small, either small pieces like these pocket knife parts, or thin-bladed knives like paring knives, boning knives, anything like that. And the biggest deal there is not so much that you can get it to a certain temperature and hold it, or that you can cool it off fast, but it's kind of understanding the relationship between heat transfer, okay? So I've got two, before we go over to the forge is all warmed up and it's set just about the right temperature and everything. I've got a whole pile of pocket knife parts over there that have already been cycled and they're ready to harden. But first, before we go over and do that, and I show you a couple of neat little tricks on doing small pocket knife parts, I want you to think about these two examples of heat transfer, okay? So like I said, it's about 25 degrees outside out right now, right? Now this is my machinery's handbook. There's nothing special about this book for this thing except for the fact that it's thick, right? If I was to take this book and set it outside, even at 26 degrees from a 50-degree shop, okay, and come back in an hour, the cover of this book will be at 26 degrees Fahrenheit, which is what it is outside. The center of that book will probably still be more like 50 degrees, okay? Because the outside of the book is insulating the inside of the book. Same way the other way around. If I was to leave this book in my car overnight, outside, and it was 26 degrees completely all the way through, I leave it out there for 12 hours. I bring this book in and I lay it there on the bench in my shop. 20 minutes later, I'll come back and the cover of that book will still be cold to the touch. 2 hours later, the cover of the book will be warm to the touch, fairly close to room temperature, but that first couple of pages might be still kind of cold, and the center of that book is more than likely going to be, considerably colder than the room. It's because it takes that long for the heat from the room to penetrate through the side of the book, penetrate through 500 or 1,000 pages or whatever, to get to the middle of that book, right? And the entire time, the outside of this material is slowing that heat down and moving. I mean, it's a gradual sort of thing. Now, on the other hand, you guys have you ever cooked fish or ribs or something like that, something pretty nasty in the oven, right? And you got your cookie sheet you're going to be cooking it on, but who wants to scrape all that stuff off of the cookie sheet after you're done cooking? So you line your cookie sheet with aluminum foil. Okay. Now you can set that whole thing with the fish or whatever in your oven, bake it at 350, 400, 500 degrees Fahrenheit, right? You open up the oven, everything inside that oven, let's say, is at 500 degrees. Okay? Everything. The foil, the meat, the pan, the racks, everything, right? Now you open up that door, you get that waft of hot air in your face, right? Now, if you were to reach into that oven with your bare hand and try grabbing a hold of the rack or the pan, it would not feel all that great. Okay? It'd be hot. Now, but a lot of times you can grab a hold of that aluminum foil and pull the whole thing out just with your bare hands. Well, how can that be if everything's 500 degrees, right? The thing is that the second you open that oven, everything is in that oven is at 500. The house is probably at 60 or 70 degrees, right? That shock, which you wouldn't think that 60 or 70 degree air is a shock, but to a 500 degree oven it is. That shock of that 60 to 70 degree air will cool that aluminum foil down enough to where a lot of times you can grab it and hold on to it long enough to pull the whole dang thing out without injuring your fingertips. It might feel a little bit warm, but you're probably not going to injure them, right? Because that aluminum foil, that metal, is so thin it transfers heat so quick. All right? So, the biggest problem with 1095, like I said, it's got to be cooled from that 1500 degrees Fahrenheit to below, 200 degrees or 300 degrees or whatever it is in a matter of, less than a second. The problem is the trip from the forge to the cooling medium, okay? And we'll explain that when we get over there. I'm going to take the coffee. These are already heat treated, so we'll leave those there. And let's walk to the forge. Okay, so we have got a forge set up here. Set the minion with the coffee in a safe place. Okay, so now first thing, when you're heat treating anything, is turn that forge way down, right? That's one of the reasons that I run a blown forge, okay? So a blown forge design, you've got the fuel coming in on that line, and then you've got the air with a blower coming in on this line. You got a valve on the fuel, you got a valve on the air. You can completely control the fuel and the air mixture, all right? So a blown forge is a little bit more complicated to build. There's more moving parts, all that kind of stuff. But you have control over a blown forge that is unmatched. We can set that forge up to where the steel is hot, but it will not go over critical. Or we can set it to where it just kind of sits over there. What we've got it set at now, and this is important, is we've got it so I can throw a piece of steel in there and it will come up a little bit too hot, okay? But the thing is that if you set it to where it's just at critical, then we sit here and we take too long to wait on our parts to reach the right temperature, right? So you want to run it a little on the hot side and then watch your steel. You'll be able to watch the shadows and watch the steel heat up until it reaches critical. Give it another 30 count or so, pull it and quench it. Here, what we've got is we've just got canola oil, and this is a drywall mud pan, so it's kind of a rectangular shape. And then I've been bending these little doohickeys right here out of hardware cloth. Okay, this is a 1/4 inch whole hardware cloth, and it's just a V shaped like that, right? And then it's got the edges that kind of hook over the sides of the pans. The idea for that is that as the steel comes out of the forge and you drop it in, this will self-align it, drop it, and then hold it vertical an inch or so off the bottom of the pan so that it's completely surrounded by oil, And the holes in there make it to where nothing is stopping the oil from, you know, naturally moving around the steel. Because as that steel is hot, it touches that oil, it's going to be boiling that oil. And it's the boiling action is going to move the oil out of the way and bring, you know, it's turbulence. You know, it'll continuously bring fresh oil in there. Now, like I said, let's make sure to get you all in here right. Okay. Now, remember the analogy of the aluminum foil in your oven, right? Okay, this is the same deal, only it's way, way worse, okay? Like I said, that steel, this 1095, needs to be at roughly 1500 degrees when it touches the oil, okay? Not 1500 degrees here, 1500 degrees as it touches that oil. If it is not hot enough, if it's not at that critical temperature, when it contacts the oil, it will not harden, okay? So if you're at 1500 degrees here and it's 1500 degrees inside the forge and it's 50 degrees inside the shop, the second you pull that part out of the forge, it's getting hammered with that 50 degree temperature and it's cooling it down just like the aluminum foil in the oven. Okay, so a lot of times you'll miss that nose curve thing, right? It'll be, by the time it reaches the oil, it'll cool off too much and it won't harden, or it won't harden fully by the time it reaches the oil. Here is a hell of a way to combat that. Use a carrier, okay? So you take that little bitty blade, right? You heat it up in the forge. First of all, if you hold on to the tang like that with your pliers, that tang is going to be a different temperature, and it probably won't harden either because your tongs are going to be colder, right? So you need the entire blade to get nice and hot. Now you can leave leave a tab on the point of the blade or something, you know, it's sacrificial, but that's just a whole lot of extra work. So now if you heat this up to 1500 degrees and pull it out, now 50 degree air is hitting it from all sides. It's cooling down. It probably won't harden when it hits the oil. But if you have yourself a preheated piece of steel and you lay that blade on that preheated piece of steel, stick it in there, warm the whole thing up, now pull it out and then just drop the blade into the oil, now you've got this carrier will be insulating it because it's hot. It's insulating that air around that blade, and it'll keep it nice and toasty until it reaches the oil. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and do one, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, if you these are just slip joints, and they're going to have hammered pins. Okay, so the holes, you know, that we drill for the pivot pin, that pivot pin is going to swell up and it's going to fill that hole. So it doesn't really matter if we lose 0.5 thousandths to scale inside the hole. If you're working on a liner lock or something that's got a bushing that you want to really maintain the integrity of that hole, dip the tang into the oil before you start heating it up. That oil will tend to bake inside that hole, and it'll act an awful lot like a non-scaling compound. But you don't have to order it. I mean, it's right there already. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop our blade, kind of get it centered up. Can you see that? Now we're going to put the whole thing in there, and since we got that carrier, we can set it up to where we hit the perfect spot of the fire. Now we're going to take a handy dandy rod with a bent over thing for a handle and kind of a squash tip as a holder doohickey. Okay. Now we're going to watch that blade come up to temperature. I would let you see that, but the color is kind of too intense for that camera. So we're going to watch it come up to temperature. Now it's warming up already. See how it's warming up already, but there's shadows in there, so it's not quite ready yet. Using a file for this works really good because the file's got raised teeth and they kind of get the blade just up off that steel enough to let you know, heat and air circulate in there a little bit. How much that matters, I don't know, but it makes me feel good. Okay, so that right there is at the temperature that we want. We're going to give it another about that much maybe. Okay, we're going to warm up the end of my poker here, because we don't want anything that's not at temperature to be touching that blade and sucking heat away. All right, so now we got a little bit of color on there. Okay, so the idea here is I'm going to be holding this with my poker like that. Bring it over here. Drop it straight down. Okay, now it's in. We know that it was the right temperature when it hit the oil because we've got a whole lot more mass keeping it that way. All right, now we can do the same thing with the spring. We'll grab our spring here. So the reason I got two setups here is because another thing that I think happens a lot of times is you don't give the part enough time in the oil to cool down at the rate that it needs to. So we're going to go ahead and heat up the spring and then go ahead and quench the spring, and then by the time we got the spring in the oil, then the blade will be, you know, cooled off enough to be able to pull it out, wipe it off, and then put it in the rack, and then we'll go through the rest of the blades, and then we'll quench everything twice. With 1095, I typically do a triple quench. The triple quench, well, you guys can look that up quite, you know, I mean, that's kind of a big topic for a quick 30-minute video. But multiple quenches tend to give you a finer grain at a lower hardening temperature. Okay, so now we pulled it out, turn it sideways, drop it off. Add another blade. No, actually we won't. I'm not going to have you guys sit here and watch me do, I think we've got like 8 of them here. Okay, so now we got our handy dandy magnet, and I left my rag here. Okay, so now you can hold the end of that. Oh, the oil was preheated, by the way. Now, this blade is still going to be warm. It's not quite hot enough that I need pliers. Now we'll go ahead and take you over here and finish up the video in the light. You keep it dark around the forge so that you can see your colors a little bit better. Okay, so now you can see that blade, right? Now, you see how it's got a nice gray color? Okay, there are bits and pieces of mostly discoloration, but there's no scale holding on to the sides of it. And I don't have one here that does have scale holding on to the sides of it. If you had scale holding on to, I've got another video called How to Read Quench Patterns, and it really goes over this quite a bit. But if you have scale holding on at one portion of the blade or another, then that would be an indication that that part of the blade was not at the correct temperature when it hit the oil. Okay, because that scale, when you harden from a correct temperature, it pops off nice and clean, just like this is. Okay, so that right there looks like a very nicely hardened blade. It's all nice and even. There is a spot right here that's a different color, but there's still no scale holding on. If we were to take this with my file, my heat treating file, it'll probably grab the first half a cut, and then I don't know if you guys can hear that pitch, but it's kind of sort of cutting on the outside on the very edges. Typically what that is decarb steel. Okay, decarb steel will be a little bit softer, so that first couple of strokes might kind of grab, might kind of not, and then after that, boom, it's just skating. Okay, there's no, I mean, that file is 66 Rockwell and it's not cutting that blade, which means that blade is around the 66 Rockwell also. Okay, so now we're going to take this blade, sorry about that. So now I'm going to go ahead and, as soon as I'm done talking to you right here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to quench that whole set of blades and springs. Then I'm going to go back through and I'm going to go in the same order again. That way each blade gets a nice amount of time in between hardening, you know, for the steel to do its thing. And get, you know, ready for the next cycle. I'll go ahead and I'll heat treat all of them exactly that same, right? Or harden them all exactly the same way. Then they will all go into the toaster, the middle one right there, that's set up for tempering blades. Springs, blades, everything gets tempered at the blade temperature, right? They'll go in there for 3 2-hour cycles with an hour or so in between, you know, to let it cool down. Okay, then the springs go into a different rack, and then they go into the spring temper. Okay, and that goes into a different toaster, the digital one, because I can adjust the temperature different. I use it for you know, for springs, for Kydex, for all kind of stuff. And then they'll go ahead and get their spring temper. Then once they're done getting their spring temper, then I can go ahead and pull it out and finish off the blades. But this system right here, you know, with the carrier for carrying your parts, works on any small parts that you need to make. If you need to make a spring for a Smith & Wesson revolver, right, and it's going to be, you know, that long and that wide and, you know, that thick, okay, that carrier system will work for that. If you were to try to take a little bitty piece of spring like that and try to heat treat it without some sort of a carrier, what you'd have to do is you'd have to have like a can of oil preheated and ready to go, and then a piece of wire or, you know, pliers or something holding your part, and then a torch heating that thing up, and then keep heat on it as it goes into the oil. Otherwise you'll miss, you know, you'll miss that nose curve. That the air temperature will cool that spring down so much that it won't be hot enough when it hits the oil and it won't harden. Using a carrier system like that really helps you heat treat much smaller parts and do it more repeatably. Yeah, I think that's about it. Yeah, so if you're heat treating small parts, after you do your cycling and everything, you can do your cycling, so let's talk about using the kiln instead. So a lot of guys use the kiln instead of a forge, okay? You can do the same thing in that kiln. The only problem is that the kiln is typically going to be slower, okay? The kiln will typically have, it will control your temperature to a more accurate degree than what a forge will. Depends, you know, on how experienced you are. But the thing is let's say that kiln, the inside of the kiln is a perfect 1500 degrees, if that's your tempering or your hardening temperature. The problem is getting the blade from that 1500 degrees to your oil while maintaining that 1500 degrees. The second you open the door on the kiln, you're losing heat. Okay, but you can't just fling the door. You know, I mean, it'll jack up your hinges. You know, all that kind of stuff, right? So you have to be able to open the kiln up, reach in while that cold air is coming into the kiln, grab your part, typically with cold tools, okay, bring it out. Now the air is hammering that workpiece, and get it into the oil, all while it, maintains that correct temperature. So you typically have to run it a little bit hotter to be able to have that happen. So that's one of the reasons that I don't like using a kiln for heat treating pocket knife parts, is because there's just too many variables there to get over, whereas you can do it in the forge with a carrier system like that. It's just a little bit more repeatable for me. If you find a way in the kiln that works, by all means, roll with it and, shoot a video and let the rest of us know about it. But for me, small parts like that where you have to have all the control that you can, nothing really beats the forge and doing it by eye and everything. You could also do it with a torch also. But yeah, so I think that's about it. So again, this is Joe Calton with Calton Cutlery, and visit me on the web, caltoncutlery.com. Hope you enjoyed the video, hope it helped out, and we will see you next time.